Kathleen's fine.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Kathleen Taylor with the Nevada Women's Business Center. Thank you so much for tuning in to this live stream webinar, and I apologize for the delay in getting started. We had just a couple of glitches that we had to work out. But it's my pleasure to once again partner and collaborate with a fantastic organization, SCORE. And I'll have my friend here, Mr. Samuel Schaul, talk to you a little bit more about SCORE in just a bit. I'm really pleased to introduce this topic, which is part of Sam's forte. We're going to talk about the real estate, specifically with the retail industry. There are entrepreneurs that are seeking, this specific type of real estate in the retail sector to help them with their business. So to share with you some of Sam's background, Samuel Schaul, he has 45 years of experience with retail real estate as an independent broker, and both he has the perspective from a tenant and a landlord side of things too. He has dealt in deals and real estate deals in 40 states. And he's seen all kinds of situations. He's worked with mom and pops and also like huge corporations such as Walmart. So Sam, thank you so much for being here today.
Great to be here, Kathleen. Again, I use this as an opportunity, not only for SCORE, but for the small business person who is not often aware of the traps that he gets himself into. Going into business, etc., is exciting and it's fun, but it is often done without the full knowledge of what they're really getting involved in. And when I say they, I'm referring primarily to the mom and pops. The major corporations have law firms that represent them or in-house counsels, etc. They've seen a lot of things, and they are certainly more protected and more aware than the mom and pop tenant. And on the other side of the fence, you have the landlord, who also has a battery of lawyers who is protecting him. When I tell the classes that I teach, the original lease was a handshake. It is no longer a handshake. It is now comprised of 60 plus pages, plus another 20 pages of exhibits that are geared where every time the landlord got screwed or the tenant got screwed, they found a way to incorporate that protection into a lease. And it applies not only for the big guys, but now they're trying to shove it down the throats of the mom and pops. And I'm just trying to make them aware of the things that they should be looking out for to protect themselves.
Well, I think that's a really good way to introduce the topic in reference to different types of pit holes that one should be prepared for, one may possibly encounter. So starting with the basics, we have clients that want to go into the retail industry. So how about giving us some pointers about how the business plan is crafted or developed from a retail or real estate retail perspective, Sam?
First of all, if you are starting out from scratch, the first thing I would recommend is make sure that you have experience in whatever the retail field is. And retail is everywhere from a beauty shop, which is service, to selling shoes, whatever. But anytime you're dealing with the public, it is in some way, shape, or form, a retail experience. And secondly, you better have a passion for it, because being in business is not a 9-to-5 job where you don't take home your headaches, etc. Being in business for yourself is 24/7, no matter how you look at it. I have clients who come in and they want to buy a 7-Eleven, Subway franchise, for example, and we talk about it, and they think it sounds good on paper, and I encourage them to go to work at a Subway, because they are never going to work as hard as they are at a Subway franchise, getting everything ready, making sure everything is properly displayed, it's properly compartmentalized, etc. And then what do you do when one of your key employees doesn't show up?
Right.
So it all looks good on paper, but until you're actually doing it, it's not that easy. And that's really why when people come in, I strongly encourage them to put a business plan together. It forces them to focus, and we can try to help them. Your group certainly can help as well on these plans. It forces them to think out, to identify the variables, and understand what they're really getting involved in. It's a puzzle. It is complicated, but it's not impossible.
Right.
It can be done, but you really have to spend the time and energy doing it. And if you're going to put your hard-earned money into it, or the bank's hard-earned money into it, or your family's hard-earned
Right.
money into it,
Right.
they're not going to just do it because you go and ask them and say, hey, I have this great idea. So what we try to do is through the business plan is identify the business by products, whether you're selling products or services.
Mm-hmm.
You try to identify who you'd like your customer to be.
Right.
If you want to sell open a shoe store, for example, you're not interested in selling to auto mechanics.
Exactly.
So it's got to have some relevance to what you're trying to do. So you want to identify the typical customer, the customer you want, through the demographics of understanding their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Are you selling to women? Are you selling to men? Are you selling to kids? Are you providing a senior service to people 60 and over? So you have to identify that and identify their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to sell outdoor gear, for example, skis. Again, back to the guy who's more interested in fixing his car than he is
Right.
skiing. So you have to have a good understanding of that. Secondly, identify the competition.
Yes.
Everybody says everybody selling something is competition, but in reality, what is your competition doing?
Yes.
You're not the first person in that business. So if you are selling apparel, granted you have a lot of apparel stores, but you can bring it down. You're not trying to be everything to everybody. You're not opening up a Nordstrom's
Right.
or something like that. So you've got to, again, focus on what your competition is doing, their pricing, what they are looking for in their customer base, their vendors, their displays, the experience in the store. Everybody's been talking in the last number of years, how do you compete with online? Well, you compete with online by making the experience in the store more enjoyable.
Excellent point.
There have been numerous studies over the years about the declining regional mall. Granted, it is declining. They're just too big. You don't need 4 department stores. You maybe need 1.
Right.
But the issue is still that people are social animals. They want to get out. They want to see. They want to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
They want to experience things. They want to touch. They want to feel, etc. So you can't underestimate the experience in the store, and that's what you're looking also at your competition for.
Yes.
The other thing that you want to look at is when you are looking for sites.
Right.
Again, if you are going to open, let's go back to the dress store, you don't want to be next to an auto parts guy.
Exactly.
But equally important, look at the co-tenancy in the project you're looking at. Are you seeing cars in the parking lot, or are you seeing customers walking on the sidewalk that are customers you would like to have in your store?
Yes. And that's a really good point, because then you're being due diligent in your efforts to make observations with the specific space that you're looking for, and not take for granted that just because the space is available, it's in a strip mall, and there's people in that mall going here and there, that space may not specifically be a fit for your retail business model. So looking at the physical space of the store, Sam, could you share with our listeners, about the store layout, the visibility, and the access for the customers?
Let's go, when we get to the physical space, that's
Uh-huh.
fine. The point I want to make, going back just 1 second on the business plan,
Oh, sure.
I get clients who come in and say, hey, I saw this great location. What do I put in there?
Very good.
I mean, they shouldn't be coming to me asking that. The question really is, what do you want to do, et cetera. And all that is really defined if you do your business plan. On the physical space side of it, it is another point to make. There is not one location in the whole world for your store. It's the same thing where they talk about you picking your spouse. Well, this is the only spouse for me. It may be, it may not be, but and again, you don't know until you try. But it's the same thing with physical space. You find a space that you like. In all of my years of experience, a space down the street or next door or whatever is going to be coming available. So don't jump to a space only because it's there now, etc. It has to work for everything.
Absolutely.
In the physical space layout, and this again comes to you, again, back to your business plan, and when you talk to a landlord or you talk to a broker or whatever, they're going to want to know that you have a business plan. You have an idea of what your size, the size you need, whether you need 1,000 feet, whether you need 3,000 feet.
Right.
I had a client come in, she wanted to open up a store, and she said, I asked her, you've done any, oh yeah, I've done all my homework, etc. How much space do you need? She said she needed 100,000 square feet.
Wow.
So
wow, that's like a mall.
Yeah, I mean, well, I sent her to a store that I know happens to be 100,000 square feet, and I said, well, how does that work for you? She said, wow, that's really way too big. So it is getting some perspective on what you need space-wise. Walgreens or a CVS can be 11 to 13,000 square feet. A supermarket can be 40 to 60,000 square feet. At Costco is 130,000 square feet. You got a Walmart that's 220. And you have a Subway that's 1,100 square feet. So
right.
It's important that you focus on that. Secondly, how are you going to fill that store? You've got to do some kind of a fixture layout, whether it's a beauty shop with your sinks along a wall or fixtures in the store where you're going to display the merchandise. So that's the internal part of the store. And you obviously need to set aside room for a reception area or a checkout, an office, restrooms, and some storage.
Yeah.
So these all come into play. The landlord or the various landlords that you talk to should all have footprints of the stores, and you can sketch it out on your own. You should also try to contact a fixture company if that's what you need, a plumbing supply house, whatever you think you need to make it work. Restaurants are a totally different ballgame, and that there are people who specialize in laying out restaurants,
Okay.
but leave that aside.
Sure.
On your physical space, again, visibility is critical. You've got to put yourself in the customer's shoes. Can they find you?
Right.
Can they get to you? And it's equally important, how do they get away from you?
Good point.
Because a customer having to turn right out of a parking lot to make a U-turn at the next median break to go left gets to be a pain in the neck. And they remember that. So try to put yourself at some kind of a corner where the customer can get in or get out. I mean, shopping centers have been around for a long time, and retailers are very sophisticated in terms of why they pick certain locations.
Yes.
And part of that is there has to be a stoplight, there has to be a corner, and so forth. So again, making it easier for the customer. And you have to be aware of that. So it's that access in and out and your visibility. The same thing applies in your visibility and signage. Especially in Las Vegas, most of your major streets have speed limits of 45 miles an hour.
Yeah.
You can't drive down a street going 45 miles an hour and reading Tom, Dick, Harry, and Jack's flower shop.
I agree.
It just says flowers, and that's it.
Yes.
So, again, something where you have to be aware of what the customer is really doing. And as I said originally, you are not the customer. So you may love the space, but you've got to, again, think about your customer. Is he going to like your space? Is he going to be comfortable in your space? All of these come into play. And again, going back to your co-tenancy, you want to make sure that you are in a shopping environment that is conducive to your customer again.
Right.
You're not going to put your dress shop next to an auto parts store.
Right, it's just not going to work.
I don't care how good the location
Yeah.
is, it's not going to work. Your customer is she's going to look at you like, what am I doing next to an auto parts store?
Yeah.
I don't want to run into a guy on the sidewalk who's covered with grease.
Yes.
He's a mechanic.
Right.
And you're wearing Gucci or Jimmy Choo shoes or whatever. Yeah, it doesn't work. Okay.
So, in reference to knowing your customer and engaging with your customer from a marketing perspective, what are some tips, from the retail side of things? How does the customer know that the retail store exists, or why should they buy from your particular retail store? What are some things that you would advise entrepreneurs to consider with these two things?
Again, this goes back to the business plan, and we put a lot of emphasis on marketing. Whether you do it by flyer, whether you do it by trade show, however you get the word out that you exist, and make sure that it certainly one is in a positive vein, but it's not easy, and that's why we focus so hard on it, because of the competition that's out there. And simply say, well, I'm going to do it on the web, I'm going to do it through social marketing. It's not enough.
Right.
It's easy to do, but it's not enough.
Yes.
Because you're a shoe store, you're going to go on the internet under a shoe category. How are they going to find you?
Yes.
They got 10,000 shoe places that they've got to look at. So it's very important that you think long and hard about getting the word out to your potential customer, what you're doing, whether it's public relations through the newspaper, whether it's paid advertising. However, there are a lot of channels out there. There's a lot of noise out there that the public has to go through, to sift through, to find out what they're really looking for.
Yeah.
So
Layer by layer.
So your marketing really has to be targeted. And the more you identify your customer, who they are, where they are, what they do, those are the kinds of things that you really have to give a lot of thought to. And there's no easy way to do it.
No, it's not.
Probably one of the examples that goes against that are these new recreational marijuana stores. Okay, all they got to do is get open, and people will find them.
Yes.
But that is not the rule.
Right.
In marketing.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, again, if you had 500 marijuana shops in Las Vegas, how do you know they're going to pick yours?
Oh, good point.
So you've got to be aware of how to approach the customer. There are a lot of ways to do it, and there are a lot of, we talk about branding, and how do you get other people to support you. If you're selling sporting goods, how do you get Rawlings or Wilson or Voight to help you with your marketing, or Under Armour, those kinds of things. They're available. You just have to be prepared to understand it and how to get their attention where they will support you. But it's very important to understand that, and we go back to competition. You've got to be able to give that customer a fairly good reason why they should buy from you.
Yes.
Whether it's price, whether it's value, whether it's the store experience,
Right.
whatever it is, they're not going to buy just because you opened a store.
Exactly.
It's not that simple.
No, it's not. And what I find interesting is, depending upon the niche market. So, for example,
Excuse me.
well, that's okay. Maybe someone is opening a retail store that specializes in children's clothing, and then someone else is opening one that specializes in men's clothing, and then another one that specializes in like the junior miss teenage clothing. And they just assume that because they're in these particular specialized markets that they could still use the same type of marketing strategies versus a more customized approach. So what is your advice in to someone that is in the retail space and they're using social media, Facebook, Twitter, just because they're the hottest trends in the marketplace? Not every marketing strategy fits, a specific target market, especially in retail. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it goes back to identifying your target market and cooperating with other people. For example, if you're selling children's shoes, I would try and get the information out to the pediatricians or to podiatrists who do that here is a shoe store that specializes in children's shoes. So there are a number, again, avenues that you've got to be. It isn't per se, it's creative, yes, but it's also thinking about who your customer is and how do you reach your customer in a unique way.
Right.
We have one client that you worked with as well, the Salt Room
Yes.
in Summerlin. And even though when she first came in and talked to us at SCORE, she said, I want to open up a salt room. And Ava sat there and in a straight face, she's going to open up a salt room. She's from Eastern Europe. She knows what salt rooms are like in Europe, etc. Well, 10 minutes later when I stopped laughing, and she will tell you that I sat there, and we're not allowed to laugh at our clients when they come into SCORE.
I understand.
I mean,
Sure.
it's against the law. But when we sat down and went through it all, and she explained to me what it was and how it works and the benefits of it, etc., then we identified the customer base. One, it's not an everyday situation.
Right.
You've got to have a sophisticated audience. You've got to have also a lot of kids, because it is effective with asthma. It can be effective with cystic fibrosis. To a degree, it's never been proved one way or another, but we know that it does work. It's like sitting at the ocean. It's good for your skin, etc. So when we put all of this together, and Ava did most of this work herself, it really worked out, and she's doing very well at her Summerlin location. But I made her go through an awful lot of hoops to get this thing done and to get it opened right. But she had a passion for it. She was very persistent. She had good sales experience. And she also had knowledge of how they were being operated in Europe.
Oh, excellent.
And one of the things that we talked about was I also want to get what the competition is. There's not a lot of competition for salt rooms,
Right,
number
there
one.
isn't.
But there is one in California. There are a couple in Los Angeles market. There's one in Orlando. There's one in Chicago, etc. And I said, let's get the brochures from these people so we understand what they're doing, who they think they're targeting to, and by looking through some of that stuff, we're going to see buzzwords
Yes.
that are going to catch your eye. And those are the kinds of things that you're going to be using for your basis for your marketing. It's worked somewhere else. There's no reason why you can't use it. It's a shoe store, it's a salt room, it's a barber, whatever it is. There are certain things that attract your customer's attention.
Yes.
Let's identify those and let's focus on those and let's use those.
Absolutely, and that's
So-
some really good sage advice regarding marketing, Sam. Now, let's talk about the legal aspects of getting a retail space. And this is where it can get really tricky. Because everyone thinks that within the lease for the retail space and with the landlord, that whatever's in the lease, that's how it is. They don't really have a say. It's non-negotiable, or are you in or are you out? So let's talk about how, from your experience, how terms are and conditions are negotiable, that the leasee does have a voice in this.
First of all, in real estate, and in most cases like buying a car, everything is negotiable,
Right.
from the rent up and down the line. Secondly, and especially in real estate, everything has to be in writing. It's just the law, and it's the law in all 50 states. So I encourage people, as they are getting into the process, that they identify an attorney to help them go through the process. One of the things that I try to caution my clients about is about not getting married to a specific site. What happens is you start telling all of your friends and neighbors and relatives and everybody in the world, I've got a great location for my new business. You start doing your homework and you find out that this deal just isn't going to work.
Interesting.
You get embarrassed about going back to your
Yes,
friends and relatives and
yes.
everybody else. Well, it didn't work out. Well, you feel like you're a fool. That's why I want you to be aware of what you're doing up front and what you're getting involved with. And it is, going back to the part about everything's negotiable, when you are calling off of a sign or off of calling a broker to work with you, a tenant's broker, for example, what they're telling you up front is not necessarily what they're willing to do. I'm not saying, for example, if the landlord is asking $2 a square foot, there's no reason you can't offer him $1.50. The issue is that if the landlord says, no, I want my $2, then you have a decision to make.
Right.
Is that space worth $2?
Yes.
Or is there a space down the street that's $1.75? Is there a space on the other side of town that's $1.25, etc.? So you've got to do your homework to understand what the market rent is for that particular space.
Yes.
The other part of it is, which is equally important, is if you call a landlord or a broker and you say, how much is that space? If that landlord gives you a number right off the bat, it's not the right landlord.
Interesting.
You want a landlord who's going to be interested in you and interested in your business.
Okay.
And again, if you're going to put a dress shop in an auto mall type of environment,
Right.
and the landlord gives you just the rent,
Yes.
it doesn't make sense. You don't belong there. The landlord ought to be questioning you about your background, your experience. Do you have a business plan? What do you want done in the space? I used to work with big box tenants who would get a rent number from the landlord, and they'd say, okay, I'll pay you $2 a square foot, but I want all of this work done in the space.
Oh, I see.
And the landlord has to think about it now, because he's got to put $100,000 into the space. All of a sudden, the economics don't work.
Yes.
But the tenant only remembers that lowball number.
Yes.
So you've got to be really careful when you discuss those numbers. You've got to make sure that what you're talking about and what the landlord are talking about, you're on the same page.
Exactly.
That you are talking about X amount of dollars for rent. You are talking about the landlord's going to do a certain amount of improvements, and the rent is going to hold.
Right.
The rent can, you ask the landlord for the moon and then expect the landlord to stay at that same original rent. It's not going to happen. But you really want a landlord who's going to ask these kinds of questions. What is your business?
Right.
What do you want done in the space? And who are you? If he doesn't ask those kinds of questions, he's just selling space. He's selling cars. He's selling typewriters.
Yes.
Whatever he's selling, he really doesn't care about you. And you want a landlord that really cares. You want a landlord who understands his property, who understands the tenants that are in the property, who understands the customers that are coming to the property. And it's a partnership. If you're not successful, you're going to create a vacancy for him. He's going to be
Right.
out some money, etc.
Yes.
He shouldn't be interested in that. He wants to make sure that you are doing everything in your power, and he's doing what he can to make sure you are there for the long haul, and that you're successful.
I think that's fantastic. And at the same time, Sam, Having a landlord that wants you to do your due diligence also holds you accountable as well as the business owner, and it also makes positions you in a situation where you may have a landlord that is putting you to task for these things, and that ensures or at least increases your success versus a landlord that just needs a body to fill the space and a rent check at the end of the month. Now, in reference to terms and the whole economics, of a lease. How can a person try to figure out, okay, now based on my inventory or my startup costs, can I afford $2 per square feet, or maybe I should scale back to 125? How does all that come into play into a person's startup costs?
Well, again, it goes back to the business plan and putting your numbers together and getting, and you put a budget together. Bearing in mind, you know what your costs are going to be in terms of your rent, your utilities, your phone bill, things like that. Your sales are strictly a projection. So you want to be conservative on your projections. You also want to be conservative on your costs, and you also, most importantly, you need money, working capital, to survive the first 3, 4, 6 months, whatever.
Yeah.
I look at this as the time you need and the money you need to learn from your mistakes.
Oh.
My son often asks me, is that guy really smart? And I would say to him, I don't know how smart he is. The bottom line is he has enough money to learn from his mistakes.
Oh, very good.
So that's really what you need that working capital for, is to make sure that you're marketing to the right people, you're getting the word out, etc. So, but that, again, it's a projection. That's the only way you can describe it. You make the best guess that you can, knowing what your fixed costs are going to be. But when you get into discussions with the landlord or the broker, et cetera, about, you've gone beyond all the initial questions, the rent. There are many kinds of rent. There is rent you give the landlord. There is a contribution you make to real estate taxes, to insurance of the property, to maintenance of the property, which includes sometimes maintaining the roof and the structure of the property.
Interesting.
There can be a promotion fund. There are a number of fees that can be added to all of this. So when you say, what's the rent, you want to make sure that this is all the money that you're paying to the landlord. It isn't rent plus, plus, plus.
Excellent.
So you've got to have a ballpark of what all those numbers really amount to. The other part of it is your term. How long are you going to be in business? If your capital requirements are minimal, then your term is not as important as if, for example, you're putting in a beauty shop, which is a lot of plumbing, etc.
Yes.
You need a longer term to amortize those costs.
Okay.
So,
okay.
And the next part of it is your option. An option gives the tenant a right to stay in the space for a rent number, and you want that rent number fixed. You don't want that to be market rent, because market rent creates another potential for negotiation, which you're really trying to avoid. Market rent usually consists of a landlord going out, getting an appraiser, a tenant going out and getting an appraiser, and those two appraisers pick a third appraiser who gives you the market rent.
Oh, wow.
So you really want to make sure that that's fixed, but it is also your option.
Yes.
Now, by being your option, it doesn't mean, let's say you're paying $2 a square foot and your option rent goes up to $3 a square foot. That doesn't mean that you have to accept the $3 a square foot.
Okay.
It still gives you the right to negotiate that. Maybe $2.50 or $2.25 is the right rent. Now, the landlord can come back to you and say, well, you signed this document at $3. It then comes back to you as your choice. Well, do you want to continue to renegotiate, or do you want to lose your right to the option? So again, it's basically knowing what your rights are
Yes.
more than anything else.
Definitely.
The other part of it is that it's critical in the beginning is your delivery date. When do you get the space?
Okay.
You normally get the space when the lease is executed by everybody, or when the landlord has a certain amount of work to do. He
Okay.
has to put in new lighting, has to paint the store, has to put in new walls because he's dividing the space. When that work is done, then it is your lease commencement date.
Oh, okay.
Now,
Interesting.
that doesn't necessarily mean your rent commences at the same time.
Oh, all right.
So if the landlord is giving you, let's say in the letter of intent, he gives you 3 months free rent, you have to know when that 3 months really starts.
Oh, I see.
If it starts when you sign the lease
Okay.
and you don't have your permits, then you've spent
Good point.
60 days trying to get your permits, you've got 2 months of free rent without being open.
Ah.
So you want to make sure that that rent abatement or that free rent time really commences when you are open for business. Now, there will be a time limit anywhere from 30, 60 to 120 days, depending on what has to be done by you as a tenant, of this rent abatement period
Okay.
until you get your permits and get the construction people in, et cetera. But the objective of this is to not have to pay rent until you open. The landlord will put that 30, 60, 90 day again as an outside date. If you aren't open by that time, that's tough. You start paying rent.
Wow.
But you've got to know
Gotta know.
that you've been to the building department, you know what you need to do. If you need permits, if you're doing any plumbing or electrical, some cases require getting an architect
Yes.
to go in and do the drawings and make all of this work. So be cognizant of when your lease commencement starts and when your rent commencement starts, and they should be separate dates. The other part that's very important is the guarantee.
Oh.
Most landlords will not accept a mom and pop without a personal guarantee on the lease.
Interesting. Okay.
Now, what that says is that your assets are at risk.
Right.
Now,
it is.
if you're getting a loan from the bank or the SBA or whatever, they're gonna have first rights on whatever assets if the business doesn't work.
Uh-huh.
But you really try not to, you wanna put a limit on the personal guarantee. That if you default in the business, you want to limit that personal guarantee to 3 months, 6 months, a year. You can ask for it.
Okay.
You may not get it, but you still have the right to ask for it. The issue that I go to on this is that if you pick a location that's been vacant for 6 years, and you think that your business is gonna work there, which it probably is not going to,
Right.
but you think it's gonna work there, and you have a personal guarantee, the landlord really doesn't care. He's getting rent from you for the time you're there and for the time that you're not there,
Wow.
and so you're obligated for a long period of time. So you've got to be careful of those kinds of situations. You want to make sure that the property you're looking at is marketable. If you go down,
Right.
it may be your fault, but you want to make sure it's not the location's fault.
Good
So
point.
that you can sublease, or you can assign lease, or you can get out of it.
Right.
Most big landlords really do not want to come after a client or a
Okay.
tenant for being in default. I mean, there are a number of reasons why you go into default,
Sure.
but they really don't want to come after you. They don't want the PR, they don't want vacancies, they want to be good landlords, etc. So you really want to make sure that you have, you would call it an exit strategy.
Oh,
Can you get out of the space through assigning it, through subleasing it? If you want to sell your business and your lease is up in 3 months, you're in trouble.
Yes, yes.
Because
Yes.
the landlord's going to say, hey, he's selling his business,
Right.
I'm going to double his rent. And you do this after he sold the business. So if you're going to sell your business,
Wow.
this still comes into play. make sure that the landlord and the buyer get together and have an acceptable rent going forward. Otherwise, the new buyer is at the landlord's mercy. So all of this really does come into play.
Yes.
But again, looking at the assets you potentially lose, the landlord's concerned that you're committed. That's why he wants this personal
Yes.
guarantee. But the landlord really doesn't need the money like he says he does.
Ah, okay.
So
Interesting.
you've got to be aware of, you can ask for a limit on your guarantee.
Oh, really?
There's
Very
no
good.
reason you can't ask for it, and there's no reason you shouldn't get it. This comes into your default clause in your lease, and you've got to read that very carefully, because there's some language in some of the leases where you are not only obligated for the time that you were in the business and weren't paying rent,
Right.
but you would also be obligated for the next 3 years of the lease.
Wow.
It's called an acceleration clause.
Interesting.
So you've got to be aware of some of these obligations that you are, you're always looking at it as you're going to be successful, you're going to be the best store in the world.
Yes.
I always look at the downside. How do you protect yourself if there's things you can't control? There are other things in the default language that I like to protect the client from, in that if the client becomes disabled, he's in a car wreck and he can't work. Equally important, if he comes down with a sudden ill, has a heart attack, has, God forbid he gets cancer and dies,
Yeah, that happens.
he does not want to obligate the estate to paying for a that isn't there.
Right.
So it is not inappropriate to make sure that you are protected on those things as well.
This is what I find so valuable about SCORE, in that here you have volunteers with a plethora of experience, like for yourself, Sam, in the retail real estate industry. And that's why I always recommend to our clients and people in general, if you're looking for that mentorship component from someone that's been there and done that, it's very knowledgeable, I always recommend them to SCORE. So would you like to share with the audience some things about SCORE and what you do as a mentor?
Fortunately, I've gotten the other mentors to send me most of their real estate issues.
Okay.
Because I specialize in this, and I know this, and I've seen
Yes.
everything. I tell my classes as well that I know this country by regional malls.
Wow.
I mean, other people know it by baseball teams, museums,
Yes.
architecture, rivers, whatever. I know it probably by the worst way possible, which is the regional malls,
That's interesting.
which is, it's a terrible way to know the country, but it's interesting. But SCORE is a national organization. We have over 300 cities are represented. We have over 10,000 counselors around the country with various aspects of business, whether it's social marketing, real estate, manufacturing, etc. It is free, it is confidential, and we are available to the client as long as the client feels he needs us.
Sure.
There are clients who come in, the first time they say, we go through an opening discussion with them, try and understand what they want to do, etc., and they never come back. It isn't that we try to make it realistic for them.
Right.
Why put their time and money into something that they really aren't committed to?
I agree.
And that's what we try to do, is make sure that if they're going to do it, our objective is to make them successful.
Exactly.
It isn't just to get them open, it's to make sure that they're there for the long term.
Yes.
It doesn't do anybody any good to be open for a very short period of time.
I agree.
And what I do on my part of it is really to make the mom and pops aware of what they're getting involved in with real estate, what their exposure is, things they can and can't ask for, and really how to protect themselves.
Yes.
It isn't, well, the landlord wants $2 and I'm just going to pay $2 without really thinking about it.
Right. And some
It is-
people do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have, when you do your business plan, it will come to you and it'll show you that you can't afford $2. It doesn't mean you can't ask for $1.75 for the first 2 years and pay it back later on in the lease, etc. So there are a lot of ways to work around it, but again, in the initial stages, the landlord has to be concerned about you and your business.
Yes.
And if he doesn't think it's gonna work, he's seen an awful lot of businesses. He's really, in his own way, trying to protect you. He is not, he's not saying no to you because he doesn't like you personally. He's saying no because he doesn't believe that your business is gonna work in that location.
That's excellent.
And it's valid to ask him why he thinks that way.
Yeah.
And because of his own experience, you may get some very good reasons why. And you can go back and redo your business plan.
Right.
Again, it's an ongoing process. It forces you to think. It forces you to, when you put the numbers together, it gives you a guideline. It gives you a way to judge whether you're making progress or not.
I agree.
So the more you do ahead of time before you open your business, the more prepared you're going to be, one, for a downturn. Secondly, have the knowledge and the ability to be flexible and adjust your marketing, whatever.
Right.
And the other part that's interesting as well is if you're in a regional mall, for example, and this was a major change in the malls in the 1950s.
Interesting.
It used to be open from like 9 to 6, and that was it.
Oh, okay.
So a person could run their own store.
Oh, they sure could. Yeah.
So
you're right.
now with the mall being from 9 to 9 or 10 to 10,
Yeah.
it's a second shift.
It is.
So your payroll costs are going to go up. And it is also very difficult for a store owner to trust somebody else.
Yes, it is.
It's
very difficult.
It is very hard because somebody else is going to be at the cash register.
Yes.
Somebody else is going to insult a customer that you have no control over. So you have to, again, be aware of these kinds of things, what you're getting yourself involved in. I'm not saying don't do it. There are a lot of retailers who are very successful.
Absolutely.
And bear in mind, all of these chains all started with one little store.
Yeah, they did.
So
Just build.
it is possible. But you have to be able to focus and understand what you're doing and get good support with an attorney to get you through the lease,
Yes.
an accountant or bookkeeper who can explain your numbers, make sure all your taxes are current and things like that. You know, your taxes are not free money to you and you have to pay it when it's due. You better be prepared for it because the government's not going to walk away from this stuff.
Exactly, not at all.
So again, these are all the things that we talk about to make sure that the person is fully aware of what they're getting involved in. It is just not opening up a store and hoping and praying
Right.
that people are going to come in and buy out your inventory the first day.
Exactly.
It just doesn't work that way.
And I'm so it's wonderful to have SCORE as a valuable resource in the community to give people that reality check and also the guidance as well to be diligent in their efforts in exploring the different options and, quote, reading the fine print and doing their research if they're going into the retail market. So Sam, if someone would like to contact SCORE or contact you, could you share your contact information?
Yeah, the SCORE office phone number is 702-388-6104. If it's real estate, call them. Lisa and B are at the desk. Tell them you have a real estate issue you want to discuss. It will end up with me. If it's another issue, if it's manufacturing, whatever, they will talk to you. I can't encourage people enough. Whatever they want to do different than what they're doing now
Yes.
is to call in to SCORE and help get some direction and get an idea or an outline of that will give you an idea of where to focus on, what to do, and what the steps are. It is, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that we're going to answer all your questions,
Sure.
and we're not going to do most of the legwork, but you have to be prepared to do the work that's required.
I agree.
And the other thing that I would tell them is don't go out and get a business license until you know you have a business.
Thank you, Sam. Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
They are convinced that if they have a
Absolutely.
business license, they can do anything.
Yes,
Have a business. Know that you're going to have customers. I don't care if you're
Yes.
doing it out of your home or on the sidewalk, whatever. Make sure you have the good ideas for a business. You have your loan in place. You have all these other things to spend $1,000 to incorporate and get your business licenses without having a business is throwing money away.
literally, yes.
So that's the other thing I stress. When they come in, I have my business license, what do I do? I have a location, what do I do?
Oh, boy.
Start focusing on this. Start writing all your ideas on paper
Yes,
so we can then go through it and identify the variables. How do we solve the variables? In some cases we can't, but at least you're aware of what you're up against.
yes, exactly.
So, again, we will give you the best knowledge that we have, the best advice, and we will refer you to other counselors and mentors at SCORE and other agencies in the community that can help you. But you've got to be prepared to do the work,
Yes,
and you've got to be prepared to make the sacrifices that are going to be required, and we're not going to have all the answers.
yeah, and that's just reality.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Well, Sam, thank you so much. This has been absolutely a treat. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for tuning in to this live stream webinar to talk about the retail sector, specifically on the real estate side of things. I'm Kathleen Taylor with the Nevada Women's Business Center. If you have any questions about any of our services, please give us a call at area code 702-734-3555. Until next time, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Thanks again, Sam.
thank you.
Awesome.